Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to the launch of At Risk, Diana Cant's new poetry pamphlet. Diana is a consultant child psychotherapist who has worked for many years with highly distressed and depressed young people, many of them in residential care. She won the inaugural Child Psychotherapy Essay Prize, and she's written many articles and professional papers and contributed to mental health programs on BBC4. To start this evening's launch, I'd like to introduce Monica Lanyardo, a child and adolescent psychotherapist with many years of experience of working with the sort of children Diana's poetry is about. She also had the pleasure of working with Diana in a residential setting, working therapeutically with children and the staff.
Good evening, everyone, and it's really a pleasure and actually my honour to say a few opening words at Diana's book launch of her book of poetry, At Risk, The Lives Some Children Live. The words trauma and neglect are familiar and sometimes overused in our culture. But it is nevertheless very hard for any of us to bear to hear in an unadorned way about the fear, pain, distress, and anger of children whose early childhoods have made them at risk from being seriously harmed by adults. It's hard to listen with the heart as well as the intellect to the lives some children live without being deeply moved as well as shocked. Diana has managed to distill the essence of these communications from within the psychotherapeutic relationship into the authentic, powerful, and beautiful words of her poetry. Her poems come from the heart and go to the reader's heart by expressing the intensity of feelings and experiences that take place in the therapeutic encounter. The poems are full of compassion and understanding for the children's plight, calling forth many feelings in the reader, including sadness and anger about the harm the children have experienced in their young lives. And yet there is hope. By giving the children a voice that is listened to in therapy and in their everyday lives, there is the possibility of being deeply understood and accepted within new and caring relationships. Diana's poems give an intimate and humane insight into the tortuous path that children who are at risk have to travel. This collection of poems will be of great value to all who read them. They're hauntingly beautiful and full of meaning. It's a real achievement to be able to convey the lives some children live through poetry. And as we will be hearing, Diana's poems come from the heart and are a tribute to the courage of the many children she has worked with over the years. Congratulations, Diana.
Thank you very much, Monica. You've given us a very clear context for Diana's work. As a poet, Diana has an MA in poetry writing from Newcastle University through the Poetry School in London. She is a member of the Mid-Kent Stanza Group and the Canada Water Poetry Group, and her work has been published in Finished Creatures, The Alchemy Spoon, Brittle Star, Ink, Sweat and Tears, Nine Muses. It's also appeared in various anthologies such as Humenagerie, 84, Places of Poetry, and Beyond the Storm. She was longlisted in the Ginkgo Prize in 2019 and commended in the Hippocrates Prize in 2021. Her first pamphlet, Student Bodies 1968, was published by Clayhanger Press in 2020. We were very pleased and honoured when Diana brought her second pamphlet, At Risk, to us to be published this year. As the poet Tamar Yoseloff, who is here tonight, has said, Diana's poetic gifts are such that she tells these harrowing stories with great empathy, never forgetting the human suffering behind them, while highlighting the humour and resilience of their subjects. This is a tough book, but one created out of love and a genuine desire to represent these brave survivors. So, without any more from me, here is Diana to read from her book. Diana Cant.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Monica and Janice, for such a generous introduction. And I really want to thank you, Janice and Donal, for publishing this pamphlet, because it's a pamphlet that means a great deal to me, both personally and professionally. I'm not going to say very much before reading the poems. What I am going to say is that most of these poems were written as part of the rather wonderful MA at the poetry school. So I want to thank my tutors there, Tamar Yoseloff and Glyn Maxwell, and also the very supportive group of poetry peers that have evolved from that, the Canada Water Poets, for enabling me to bring this series of poems into being. And finally, and most importantly, as Monica's alluded to, I want to pay tribute to all those children who've had the courage to share so much of themselves and their lives, and who afforded me the privilege of knowing them and working with them. So just a couple of fairly down-to-earth things. First of all, a word about confidentiality. All the identities of all the young people referenced here have been disguised and or conflated to ensure confidentiality. And there are a series of footnotes accompanying some of the poems that are statistics about incidents of presenting problems or resources available for young people. I'm not going to reference them this evening, but for any of you who would like to read the pamphlet, they're there to give a national context to the sorts of things that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to move on to reading the poems. So the first poem is a sort of extended metaphor for the process of psychotherapy, and it's called The Archaeology of Loss. We are excavating bones sunken in the hot, dry ground, where bodies are not often disinterred, but left to disappear. We must go gently, for every sinew sings of pain, and every tendon tenses to the pulse of blood long stilled. As we lift each one, brush away the grit, we note the nick, the bulge, the indentation, the very boneness of the bone. We raise a femur filled with longing, a tibia of loneliness, and a scapula, large and flat, evidence of love from long ago. We free each one and lay them, bare and gleaming in hallowed ground, near the river where the warblers hide and the lush bulrushes grow. The next two poems that I'm going to read represent probably the two most common presenting problems that, as child psychotherapists, we see in clinics and consulting rooms when we work with adolescents: eating disorders and self-harm. The Art of Disappearance. The tick-tick of her crutches on the path. She lurches in, throws her young body on the consulting room couch, pulling her rebellious legs after her. Her body is the theatre of a many-frontiered war. Her parents' battles etched deep beneath her flesh before she put her body armor on. She stopped eating, started to control what she could. So thin she nearly died. Yet all she speaks of is food or no food, thin gruel indeed. The first time we met, a shrew ran across the floor between us, tiny, delicate, bewildered, It paused mid-flight and sat upright, beady in the reverberating air. A shrew can dislocate its body, escape into the smallest of spaces, and this it did, disappearing through a fissure into the world beyond. This is Signet. I watch her as she comes, step dragging down the path. Sullen, sulky, her feet betray her. Meeting me was never her idea. This will be hard, I think, and so it proves. Blood from a stone girl. Her words betray her. Talking to me was never her idea. She draws blood from white limbs with a pencil sharpener blade. This is her idea. A pressure letting to ease numb pain, taut as drum skin. From a thicket of hair, she rolls her eyes, flashes me a glimpse of the woman she will become. She rolls her eyes and rolls herself alive, brave as a swan in full sail, gathering her freedom to her like a song that one day will be glorious, but today is muted, muffled by grey down, waiting to be shed. The next poem touches on the complicated issue of race in psychotherapy, especially when the child and the psychotherapist have different racial backgrounds. This is Blindsided. Such a small, grave boy, afro like a halo framing his melancholy face. His school bag sits on the floor between us, burdensome. We stare at it wordlessly. He doesn't trust me. Why should he? I haven't lived his history, will never know his skin. He doesn't speak, but silently shreds tissues in his lap. I give him pencil, paper, rubber, and he turns his back. He draws carefully, small figures that he doesn't let me see, erasing something that he hides, small grey filaments brushed from the tabletop, falling to the floor. We are falling away from one another, too much unknown, too vast to see a country. The shame of it is just now, I'm what he has. Eventually, I ask if I can look. Tiny people scurrying on the page, fat arms like wings, all bearing guns. Angels with guns? I ask, confused. No, AK-47s, he corrects. He slumps forward, head on arms. I'm tired of being black. The next two poems touch on a presenting problem that has become all too common in the child psychotherapy world, sexual abuse. So the first poem is rather more oblique than the second. Puppies. All quiet morning, no one up except the sun and you, tiptoeing softly down the stairs to see the new arrivals, young, unguarded, commas of blind helplessness, blanket snuggled, curled and breathing. Warm milk and biscuit smell, squirm of innocence, fingers soft and yielding. Your fingers squeeze, the smoothness, pinion tiny limbs, so trusting you could do anything, like he did to you. And this is show and tell. She scowls at me, stands foursquare in her glasses and pink tights, pulsing mistrust. She grabs the doll's house, chooses the toys she wants to live inside, turns her back on me. Into the house she crams mother and father doll, 4 ragged children, and a rowdy menagerie. She makes the animals roam the house. She locks the children in the garage. The animals are fed and watered with patience and tenderness. The children are fed with curses and threats. She makes the mother doll fill her bedroom with a king-sized bed, giant TV, and a shopping trolley obscene with food. It's my house, she makes the mother doll shout. I can have what I want. The father doll unlocks the garage door, seizes the smallest girl doll, the one with the yellow plaits, forces her legs apart. She looks at me pointedly, pauses the horror story of her play, sits back. Oh, well, easy come, easy go. That's what my mum always says. And this is the final poem of this section. One of the complex issues that courts and social workers have to deal with when a sibling group of children are taken into care is the decision about whether to place the children separately or together. And this is particularly pertinent when there's been sexual abuse within the family. So this is Swallow. He's worried about his little sister. She's called Swallow, a strange name for a child, but perhaps her parents tried to gift her a soaring, swooping freedom she could never possess. He's worried about his brother too, but for different reasons. His brother is a strutting cock of the walk sort of brother. Not like him, he's a plump and downy, clumsy sort of brother. Young together, freewheeling flight was never in their sights as they all huddled, feather-puffed inside their fragile nest, as their parents sparred, quarrelsome and dangerous. So when social workers came, attempting kindness, the best interests of the children, the guiding light, the 3 were rescued, but taken separately, safer perhaps, but lonely. A nest no longer feathered with the old familiar sense, and still he worries. So these next 3 poems are really, I guess you could describe them as dramatic monologues. I'm just going to let the voices speak for themselves. So the first one is the titular poem, At Risk. Because I didn't know he was a pedo, right? He was just my uncle's mate, because he used to come round and we'd chat, nothing sexy, just friendly, really. Because that gym instructor took me out and got me drunk, and he knew I was only 15. Because he took me to his place and I woke up in the morning still drunk and he was having sex with me. Because my mum was furious, said it was rape, but only his word against mine, and she grounded me, right? Because I messaged my uncle's mate and said I might need him to sort someone out for me. Because then the police are at my school. Are you aware he's a known sex offender on the sex register or some such? Because my mum's mad again, won't let me stay home alone when she's working nights and I have to go to my dad's. Because he called me a slut, said I'd just end up on my back giving blowjobs when I grow up. Because my period's late and it's all a mess. I don't know what to do. This is running. They've sent me to a therapist, so I tell her stuff I think she wants to hear, the boring stuff, the way my teacher picks on me, how my best friend is behind my back, how my mum and dad never listen, and how my little brother's a dick. She listens and she nods a lot, but doesn't ask too many questions, which is good. I start to tell her other stuff, the weirder stuff, how my body has to be in balance. The pressure on one side must be equal to the other. If I touch one thigh, I must touch the other. If I step on pavement cracks with one foot, I must do it with the other. I do this with my avatars running on the screen, a shoulder broken on a boulder, cancelled by a boulder to the other, a zigzag to the right, followed by a zigzag to the left. I tell her how all my movements have a shadow, a constant stream of counting, how even when I'm talking to my friends, there's another conversation in my head. She asks me if my life has moments that are free of this. I tell her when I'm running, it's the only time I'm free. I can leap into a space that's only mine. I have the city to myself, a nighttime place of space and freedom. No one interrupts me there. I can forget the need to balance. I'm safe inside my perfect sphere. She tells me that it's time to finish. I tell her that I like her hair, which is true. I don't tell her that I want to be a boy. "13. It was that birthday card that did it. That card from my nan. She should never have sent it. They're not supposed to contact me. But they wrote in it, 'We'll always love you, Mum and Dad,' or some shit like that. So I opened the card and it shocked me, right? Took me back. And I went to the cloakroom and that girl was there. She's a bit special, a bit ASD, you know what I mean? They say I raped her. So I suppose I did, but I don't remember. Just blank. Always loved me. What does that mean? Touched me, fingered me more like, and the rest. Sick. Not my real dad anyway. He fucked off when I was born. Never seen him. His name's Steve, I think. Drives a lorry. Not much to go on. She didn't choose well, my mum. Fucking bitch. So what'll happen now? Suppose they'll move me again. 13. Not much of a birthday, was it? Not much of a life, is it? Life's a bitch and then you marry one. That's what they say. If I get that far. Deluged. His eyes swim, vast blue seas as his pain drowns him. His words flat, dead-weighted, grief fathoms deep. He is sinking slowly before my eyes, beyond my reach. Surfacing for the third time, the loss he swallowed floods his face. Take him to hospital, I tell his mother. Don't let go. So there are two poems that are about dyslexia now, because dyslexia, if unrecognized, can lead to all sorts of behavioral difficulties, which can in turn sometimes lead to poor educational placements that may need to be challenged. So this is herding words. They push against each other, shove forwards, fighting for his confused attention. Why won't they stay still? Just when he thinks he has them penned, they make a break for it, spill out, tumble, escape, and he's lost again. Stupid, that's what they spell. Another try, calmer this time, a shape, a pattern. He has them now. But as he goes to close the gate, they leap, scatter, regroup, and turn to jeer. Stupid, that's what he is. His teacher calls him dyslexic, disabled more like. No one gets A's in this class. And this is Callum versus the County Education Authority, 2018 High Court of Appeal. There's a sound that's been following him around, a low hum moving with him like a force field. He loves the way it sends him surging into spaces he hasn't been before, like opening an unknown door. That day he went to court, frisked and bag-checked, beckoned forward by officials. No comforting sound was within then, only the hollow knocking of his fear. But oh, the glory of that place, the soaring arches, sweeping staircases, marbled floors, and patterns everywhere, and he transported in surprise. His mother muted by her tears, her folder full of paperwork unread, until his father said, "You tell him, son, what it's been like for you." And then the humming started, and the words poured out in shapes he hardly knew, tracing the patterns of his truth, how his teachers laughed when he read out loud, said he'd never pass exams, how the other kids all yelled out div, how he was labeled no matter what he did. He opened up his life and he was heard. Finding in his favor, the judge urged him to believe there was no ceiling to his success. The humming has been with him ever since, that low vibration only he can hear, a cat's contented purr, or more like bees, hive busy, creating patterns, making vaulted halls of sweetness, laying down supplies for the years ahead. And this is my final poem, When She Was 4. When she was 4 and had learned to pedal, she was off, freewheeling down the careless lanes of childhood, no backward glance. She whizzed her way through small school, waving to friends while swinging around corners at tremendous speed. A swerve and wobble as she reached 13, those friends not always what they seemed, and the lane home longer. She didn't know her cautious parents never took the stabilizers off, just in case of accidents, they had anxiously agreed. So she had never learnt to balance, although she thought she could. And as roads became more crowded and the potholes grew, her small wheels fell away and she was balancing unaided, but she looked back. And as adulthood overtook her, the ordinary stuff of grown-up life rolled past, a failed romance, an unrewarding job, an illness, and she wavered. Unpracticed as she was, she panicked and toppled sideways. Lying in the gutter, she thought of giving up, but she still longed for perfect balance, and she practiced until her knees were sore. Now, at 24, she is mistress of her balance and rides a unicycle, waving to the astonished crowds as she cruises into life. Thank you.
That's a wonderful one to finish with. So optimistic.
Well, I thought we needed a bit of optimism.
Well, there is light at the end of the tunnel for some people, isn't there?